Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kevin Gilhooly. I am the State and Federal Legislative Affairs Manager here at SCAG, and we are so excited to have everyone join us for today's Money Monday presentation, Securing Federal Funding from the IIJA and the IRA. We are lucky enough in the past year that our friends in Washington, D.C. have added 2 new acronyms to the various lists of acronyms that we know and love here at SCAG. So next slide, please. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. And the first is that this webinar will be recorded. The PowerPoint slides, the recording, and an FAQ sheet, a frequently asked questions sheet, will be available on the SCAG Toolbox Tuesdays webpage after this session concludes. And we'll send a link out to that information to everyone who's registered for the event. The meeting length is an hour and a half long. As I mentioned before, we are being recorded and participant lines must remain on mute. There will be a question and answers session at the end. And if you have a question during the presentation, please type that into the chat box so that we can make sure that we get that answered at the end. And then, let's see here, we will log all answers and then do a voice selection at the end of the presentation for anyone who has another question, if we have time for that. And again, we'll have an FAQ sheet and we'll post that at the end. So next slide, please. Let's go ahead and get some things started here. With the 1-year anniversary of the passage of the Historic Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act approaching, actually it was just last week, and the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, there is unprecedented opportunity for local governments and other governmental agencies to secure federal funding to invest in our various infrastructure needs and to mitigate the impacts of a changing climate. The presentation that you're about to hear will provide an overview of the IIJA and the IRA, key criteria that the administration has used to evaluate funding proposals and tips for successful applications, and the opportunities that are included in both of those legislative packages. Joining us today to provide the presentation are Lori Hettinger and Leslie Polner, both of whom are senior policy advisors for Holland & Knight, SCAG's lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Lori is a senior policy advisor in the Public Policy and Regulation Group in the Washington, D.C. office of Holland & Knight. She advocates for local and regional governmental agencies for their infrastructure needs, including surface transportation issues, water resources, economic development, and Army Corps of Engineers issues. Before joining Holland & Knight, Lori served as a staff director for the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee's Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure ranking member, Senator George Voinovich from Ohio. In this role, she served as his primary advisor on transportation, water infrastructure, environment, Army Corps issues, and economic development. Also with us is Leslie. Leslie Polner of Holland is the co-leader of Holland & Knight's local government group and a member of the firm's Public Policy and Regulation Group. Her key focus areas include transportation, economic development, and housing. And prior to joining Holland & Knight, Leslie was the deputy mayor for federal affairs in Los Angeles under former Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa and led the city's office in Washington, D.C. She directed its federal advocacy efforts and managed lobbying teams at the Port of Los Angeles, the Airport, and Public Utilities Commissions. Thank you both for being with us this afternoon, and we're very excited to hear your presentation. So I'll turn it over to you to take it away. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you all for joining us today. I think what we'll do is we'll start with an overview of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also Washington loves its acronyms, so also known as the IIJA. You'll sometimes also hear it referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL. And so, as Kevin mentioned, this is historic legislation. It provides $1.2 trillion in spending over 5 years. And that last part is really critical as you all think about potential opportunities. This is a 5-year bill. So many of the programs that we're going to discuss today are going to be programs that you're going to see DOT issuing over the next couple of years, which really gives gives all of you an opportunity to really compete for these programs. And so, you know, what we are seeing already, particularly with DOT, is that they've been very, very aggressive in getting notice of funding opportunities out the door. And we expect that trend to continue into next year as well, with a lot of NOFOs coming out in the early part of the year. In addition to competitive opportunities, there are a number of formula funding programs that were included as part of the legislation, and I'm going to turn it over to Lori to talk a little bit about that.
Hi, next slide. Next slide. Hi, thank you. So as Leslie said, there are a number of formula programs. These 3 formula programs are existing, have been around for a really long time, and then I'll go through additional new ones as well. The first one is STBG, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's sort of the bread and butter of transportation. Although SCAG does not receive this money directly, many of its member agencies do receive it through Caltrans. The next one is Transportation Alternatives Program. This is existing as well. And this is what the state uses to fund your active transportation program. So SCAG does get some funding through this. And it's for smaller scale transportation projects. This projects can just get out the door really quickly, like recreational trails, pedestrian and bikes as well, and environmental mitigation. And this was a priority for SCAG to increase the percentage of TAP funding that goes according to population. So that was a huge victory that it went up from 50 to 59%. Next slide. CMAQ is also an existing program funded through Caltrans, and this helps areas of non-attainment reduce their greenhouse gases in particulate matter. Carbon reduction is a brand new program that was created. This definitely was a priority for our California senators and California delegation. This is something that the state, your state is already doing, but now you get funding for it. So the money goes directly to Caltrans, but they must allocate at least 65% to urbanized areas. The state has not finalized their plan yet. So they have not given out their funding. They're waiting for the updated census urban area maps. They do have the money in hand, so hopefully you'll know how much we get soon. Next slide. Now we'll go over some competitive grant programs. Starting out with INFRA. This has been a program very popular in Southern California that's existed for 5 or 6 years. It is for freight and goods movement. Projects are regional and national economic significance. Awards were announced a couple months ago. Unfortunately, there were not any awards in Southern California. The only award in California was for the Ole Mesa Port Entry, a project that is in San Diego. MEGA is a brand new program too. I know many of the member agencies of SCAG championed this because, as you know, in California, you're not just dealing with $1 million or $200 million. Many of your projects are $1 billion or more. So this is sort of like infra on steroids. The awards are expected any day now. So hopefully we'll see them released next week because I know a number of agencies in Southern California applied for this grant. And then lastly, the pilot program for transit-oriented development. Once again, an existing program where FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, comes to visit projects and provides technical assistance to help a transit agency, an MPO, or local government to help integrate their land use and planning for existing capital investment grant programs. And last week, they announced awards, and fortunately, LA Metro got 2 awards. Next slide. These are 2 existing programs too that got huge increases in this bill. The first is bus and bus facilities. This is what transit agencies use to obviously purchase their buses, redo their maintenance facilities, etc. And these awards were announced about 2 months ago. And as you can see, Riverside got an award. And then LONO is also a very popular program, particularly in California, with their clean air regulations. So this is to purchase zero emission or low emission buses. And awards were announced a couple months ago. As you can see, Southern California did really well with this award round. The next slide. So for the first time, Congress created competitive grant programs for bridges. This definitely was a bipartisan issue. Local governments, MPOs, and states can't obviously pay these bridges on themselves. So they created 2 different programs. One was for planning, Awards were announced last month, and unfortunately, there were no awards in Southern California. And then there are two other programs. One were for large bridges, projects that are at least $100 million. Those are expected sometime next month. And then the next one is for all bridges that are under $100 million. Next slide. Safe streets and roads for all was also a priority for your delegation. There's never been a federal program for Vision Zero. I know obviously that's a really big priority for Southern California. So this program was created in the bill. The applications were due last week, and fingers crossed the awards will be announced either January or February. Next is reconnecting communities. Once again, a priority for the Southern California delegation. Senator Padilla, working with Majority Leader Schumer, worked to create this program. As you know, unfortunately, back in the 50s and 60s, when infrastructure was being built, like bridges or railroads, they were built, unfortunately, that were barring access and sort of dividing a city. And so this program was created to either remove or retrofit or mitigate these types of old infrastructure. So all communities have access to jobs, to healthcare, and other things are needed. Railroad crossing elimination is also a brand new program. Once again, there's never been a federal program for this. And as y'all know, this is very expensive. There's $3 billion for it. And this closed a couple of weeks ago. And then lastly, the SMART grant program. This is a competitive grant program that the Secretary championed and worked closely with the Senate to create this program. It is to advance smart city or community technology to improve transportation efficiency and safety. And the deadline was last week, and hopefully they will have awards early next week. This is something that help communities, states, sort of build up their data capacity, knowing that a local government and transportation agency cannot do it on their own. Next slide, and I hand it off to my colleague, Leslie.
Great, thanks, Lori. And on SMART grants, I think we're expecting those awards in early, not quite early next week, but early next year. That would be record speed for DOT.
2 weeks forward. Thanks, Leslie.
That's right. I'm going to talk a little bit about some upcoming infrastructure opportunities because as noted, DOT in particular is really trying to get money out the door and accelerating the timeline on notice of funding opportunities for next year. Some of that, of course, is the political reality that President Biden has to run for re-election in 2024, and they want to have some results to show for it. So the RAISE grant program, which is familiar to many of you, that program has existed in many, many different iterations, Build, Tiger. They already did a 2022 round where the Port of Los Angeles was successful, as well as the Inglewood Transit Connector project. We actually expect that NOFO to come out any day now. It could be this week, could be next week, but they're saying before the end of the month. The PROTECT grant program is a brand new program, and that's funding for planning, for resiliency improvements, for community resilience. There was formula funding that was distributed through the state. This is the second part of that program, which will be a competitive grant program, and that's expected in early 2023. And then finally, there is the EV charging and refueling infrastructure program. Of course, there is the EV dollars that are also going to be flowing through the state, and states have submitted their plans and those have been approved. But now this is the competitive grant program that local governments will be eligible to apply for as well. And we expect that out before the end of the year. Next slide. Now, we talked a little bit about the fact that there's 5-year funding, and for the most part, it's mandatory funding, meaning that Congress can't take that money away. It's already been appropriated for this bill, with a couple of key exceptions. So one of them is the Healthy Streets program, which was a new program, and that would be a competitive grant program to help deploy cool pavements, porous pavements, to expand the tree cover. There was $5 million that was authorized for this program. That funding now needs to be appropriated. The good news is that for this year, in the omnibus package that Congress is currently working on, the House bill includes $55 million. So, if that funding gets approved, we'd expect DOT to begin work on developing the NOFO for that and issuing that next year. There's also the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. That's also a brand new program that would be competitive for safe and connected transportation projects that connect designations within communities, active transportation spines for biking, for walking. And so the House bill, again, that's currently under consideration includes $100 million for that program as well. And then there's the congestion relief program. This was really obviously important for SCAG members and for the LA region. It's the congestion relief program, and that will be grants to projects in large urbanized area, more than 1 million people, to advance solutions for congestion. Lori, you want to talk a little bit about, next slide, about aviation opportunities?
Sure. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, got a record amount of money, $25 billion. And for those of you who work closely for the airport, most of the programs have been formalized through the AIP, Airport Improvement Program. There are some competitive as well, but they issued a lot of money for this, $15 billion. Awards have started to be announced. Most of the airports actually in Southern California have received funding, and there's going to be another NOFO coming out in a couple of months. A brand new program, this is the first really competitive grant program that's been created at FAA, is an Airport Terminal Competitive Grant Program. And this is to help build and expand airport terminals, which is previously they only had AIP funding to use that. And there's $5 billion for this. In 2022, LAX in Long Beach got some awards. The 2023 round opened up last month and recently closed. So they should be making awards hopefully early next year for the second round. Leslie?
So I think, before we turn to the Inflation Reduction Act, next slide, please. Lori and I want to offer just a couple of considerations and observations that we, as we are watching DOT with their process and in talking to staff and helping to guide a number of our clients through the process. First and foremost, I think one of the unique things that DOT has done with this funding is that they're really trying to use it as catalytic investment for workforce. Many of you will know, there was the Build Back Better reconciliation package that contemplated enormous investment in workforce. Unfortunately, that didn't pass in full form. And so workforce has been sort of one of the areas that's been missing. DOT is being very explicit in their notice of funding opportunities about the importance of having a workforce component in grant applications. And so they are among the criteria that they are using to evaluate projects is workforce development included as part of the project development? Are there pathways to good paying jobs? DOT is very explicit about the fact that they really want to see unions and labor support included. And so some of that might be priority hire programs, local hire programs, some of the things that SCAG members are already doing, but that's a real area that DOT has put into their applications that I think has been new for a number of folks. Next slide. So among other key takeaways, though, is that you're also seeing just an incredibly high priority on projects that are located and benefiting underserved communities. And so DOT has been very explicit. There's high points given for projects that are in areas that are focused on underserved communities. Climate and sustainability continues to be an area of true focus. I think, any project that doesn't have a climate component is probably not a project that's going to be successful. The other piece is, I'd say DOT really values a regional approach. They're looking for, quite frankly, bang for their buck. So they're wanting to, make sure that projects benefit the widest group of people possible. They've also been very focused on projects that are doing a really intentional job of community engagement and stakeholder engagement. They want to know that stakeholders have been involved in the project from its inception. It can't be an afterthought. They want to know that that outreach and community engagement is present from the very beginning. I think, it's no shock to any of us here that there is a high competition for projects within California, just given our state size. That said, as we've noticed in a number of the notice of funding opportunities, it's not that California is oversubscribed at this point. And so, for projects like infra, where there doesn't appear that there was a SCAG member that received an infra grant this last cycle, I think there's a lot of opportunity here for SCAG members to be to be aggressive. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it to Lori to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act.
So in August, Congress passed and the president signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a slimmed down version of Build Back Better. Congress has been trying to pass out some of the administration's major priorities for the past couple of years. As you probably see in the press, Senator Manchin in West Virginia, they needed his support. They needed at least 50 senators to vote for it, with Vice President the tiebreaker. So they had to slim it down, but include, as you can see, the $740 billion for not only taxes, but healthcare and climate and energy. The federal agencies have a lot of control over this. These programs were not as prescriptive as we saw in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The timing right now for how they're going to create these two programs and how to allocate the money is really unclear. Like every time Leslie and I meet with the federal agency or the White House, they're sort of a shock on their face, like we're working on it, but really unclear. The infrastructure bill actually gave deadlines to DOT and the agencies of when they had to create new programs and allocate the funding. This bill did not. So right now, the federal agencies are issuing RFIs, and we'll have Leslie share a few examples.
Next slide. So as Lori just mentioned, part of this is that the agencies are going to have to actually stand up a number of these programs, which are going to be brand new. And so the first part of that process is issuing RFIs, or requests for information, which is exactly what it sounds like. The agencies are putting forward a series of questions that they have where they want input from stakeholders to help shape and inform the program before they roll it out. A couple of key areas that they've already issued RFIs on. One is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. There's $27 billion that was provided for that, and that's a fund that will invest in nonprofit, state, and local financing institutions to help rapidly deploy low and zero emission technologies. The idea is really to help spur public-private partnerships. It's to help support green banks, which a number of states already have. There's the climate pollution reduction grants, where local governments will be eligible to apply for that. And that is $5 billion that was provided there. There's the funding to address air pollution at ports. And so that's been very focused, obviously, on financing a wide range of activities, like being able to purchase zero emission machinery. There's $3 billion available there, as well as the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle Program. So helping municipalities to replace heavy duty vehicles with cleaner alternatives. I know a number of SCAG members are doing really important work in this space. And so, we have been sending out the RFIs. If any of the members afterwards would like the RFIs, we're happy to send that, but it's really important to have your voice heard as the agencies are thinking about how to shape these programs. Next slide.
Next slide. So I'll go through some of the programs that haven't yet have RFIs issued for them. The first is the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program. This is very similar, almost exact same as Reconnected Communities program we just discussed. When Majority Leader Schumer and Senator Padilla and a number of other members were working to create this program, at first it was going to be $500 million a year. But to get bipartisan support, the Republicans on the Senate side asked the number to be lower. So instead, they put a lot of money into nearly an identical program and this bill. Next, Alternative Fuel and Low Emission Aviation Technology Program. That's a mouthful. This administration is urging airports become greener. And so this bill actually helps do a competitive grant program to help projects apply low emission aviation technology to, of course, help clean and reduce greenhouse gases. And then next, the Environmental Review Implementation Fund. This essentially is a program to expedite NEPA and other permits. Next slide. Another one I thought would be of interest to y'all is the Environmental Climate Justice Block Grant Program. This is a program that can go directly to a local government or transportation agency. It's targeted for funding in disadvantaged communities to help address, unfortunately, disproportionate environmental and public health harms. As we talked before, unfortunately, a lot of infrastructure such as railroads, airports, industrial areas were originally created in disadvantaged communities. So this is to help cities mitigate that. Next slide. So I think we're ready now for questions.
All right. Thank you, Lori and Leslie. And just to remind the group that if you have any questions, please place those into the chat and we would be happy to take those. I'll kick us off with a couple. Leslie and Lori, you mentioned that there was a real emphasis on economic development. Can you tell me, or could you underscore for the group what the administration's interest might be in, say, partnerships with labor for some of the applications?
Yeah, Kevin, it's a great question. It really has been kind of one of the leading areas that DOT is focused on. And so, they are looking for partnerships, as you just mentioned, pathways to labor paying jobs. They want to know that that applicants are going to be paying fair wages. They are really interested in local hire. They've been interested in community benefit agreements. They really, they're looking for folks to get really creative about this as well. So, partnerships with workforce development agencies or nonprofits have been really encouraged. So you've seen it across the spectrum, but it's really noticeable in almost every application that they have done. They've had a section on, creating good paying jobs and workforce development.
And just to add what Leslie said, if you are applying for a grant, the administration is urging you to include letters of support from labor groups.
That's great feedback. Thank you. And that makes me think of a second question. In terms of some of our community-based organizations, do letters of support from those community groups do they also add and make a particular application more competitive?
Kevin, I would say it really depends. I think that they are interested, as I mentioned before, they're looking for real community engagement and stakeholder engagement. So to the degree that a community group has really been an integral part of a program, or will be, directly involved in the program or directly benefiting from the program, I think it's really helpful. I think if it's just an ancillary, oh, by the way, folks in the community support this too, I think that's probably a little bit less useful. But again, this DOT is really looking for stakeholder engagement in a meaningful way from the program's inception. And so to the degree that community groups are involved in that process, I think having a letter of support from them, articulating that and articulating their involvement is really helpful.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. And I haven't seen any questions come through yet, so I'll ask all of our attendees, please do not be shy if you have questions. Now is our chance to ask the experts. I have another one that I'd like to throw out there, that the SCAG region is very large and it's very diverse, including politically diverse. And so there may be some jurisdictions where the representatives from those jurisdictions did not vote for the IIJA or the IRA. How would you recommend engagement with those members of the House when seeking an application for a funding program?
In working with, that's a problem across the country, actually, not just in SCAG. I have found that, and so with Leslie, that some senators and congressmen that did not vote for it still are writing letters of support. They see the transportation needs of a community, or the water needs, or economic development needs. So they're still willing to write a letter of support.
I will also say that given that we now are about to have a divided Congress too, I mean,
capture that.
This meeting is being recorded.
The meeting is being recorded in case anyone missed that. So Diane's question is there any difference between reconnecting communities and neighborhood access and equity grants? And any idea on when the NOFA will be released for the neighborhood access grant program?
Go ahead, you take it.
I was just going to say that this is actually one of the things that I think DOT is grappling with. They are very similar programs. And I think, as DOT contemplates its next round of reconnecting communities, there's been a lot of discussion about, could you issue these NOFOs at roughly the same time, so that applicants could apply to both programs at once rather than having to do like 2 separate applications. They're trying to think about that administrative burden. But Lori, I'll turn it to you.
That's a great question about the differences. We can definitely follow up with Kevin on that too, but also the one that was created and the IRA did include working with HUD as well. That was not included in the infrastructure bill. It was under DOT and it was under the surface transportation bill. So HUD did not really fit. But we'll definitely follow up with Kevin to provide more details on the differences.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question from Ashley. And that is, how is SCAG looking at issues such as cost effectiveness as a measure of both project selection and evaluation? This is a challenge for us across equity programs, and I was just wondering what thoughts you might have, since projects that are community-based may not meet this criteria, but they do provide GHG, VMT, or other needed benefits. So I'll just start off with that one and kick it over to you, Lori and Leslie, that SCAG is not the decision maker in any of these grant programs. These are going to be the DOT or other federal agencies. So perhaps Leslie and Lori, could you shed any light on how DOT or other agencies in Washington, D.C. will be making those determinations?
Well, I would just say this, and Lori, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I really think that it's interesting to see. There are definitely some programs that require very rigorous cost evaluations. And I'm thinking about, for example, the RAISE grant program or infra, which really require a very formal cost benefit analysis when you're submitting your projects. That said, there are other grants that have not required that level of formal analysis. And so, I think that those may be some of the projects that you want to look at where they're not requiring what's known as a benefit cost analysis. Lori, anything you want to?
I was just going to add that on the USDOT website, they have a great webinar on benefit cost analysis. Like Leslie said, it's not required for every program. It tends to be for freight and rail where they focus it on, but like Safe Streets and Roads for All did not require it. But we can share with Kevin as well what how DOT is using benefit cost analysis and what they're looking for across their programs.
Excellent. Then we will include a link to that then on the webpage where we're including the PowerPoint and other materials from this. And okay, another question from Norm, and that is, thank you very much for the excellent presentations, he says. We appreciate those kudos. Let's see, can Leslie and Lori please discuss how the US DOT or HUD Thriving Communities program relates to both the IIJA and the IRA, particularly provisions providing technical assistance to both local governments and community-based organizations located in underserved communities?
Lori, you want to start or you want me to?
Yeah, do you mind starting? Kind of, you recently met with the staff.
And Norm, it's always nice to see you, even on chat. So I would just say, so the Thriving Communities program, DOT is a joint program between DOT and HUD. And it's the bulk of the funding is actually with DOT. DOT is going to be selecting outside technical assistance providers to pair with local governments and CBOs to help provide technical assistance across a wide range of areas. And so the letter of intent is actually due December 6th. It's actually a pretty low burden application, in my opinion, compared with some of the other DOT applications. But so it's a really great way to sort of think about how you might tackle a challenge around kind of sustainable communities. It's a way to get kind of outside perspective and really do some planning around some tricky issues that, related to climate, related to sustainability, transit-oriented development, kind of a wide range of areas.
All right, thank you, Leslie. Lori, did you have anything that you wanted to add on that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we have another question from Brian, and that is there a standard definition that DOT uses to define disadvantaged or underserved communities?
There is, and they came up with a great tool on their website that you simply just put in the zip code, and it shares if you're in a disadvantaged community or area of persistent poverty. Once again, we'll share that website with Kevin.
Excellent, very good. Okay, and here's one from Jeremy, and that is, what resources are there to know when a particular NOFO is released? Do we just frequent the DOT or the Caltrans website? Is there an email list to get updates? Thank you for the information.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, I will also turn this to you because I know you've been sending out a lot of the information, but there is, we can send this to you as well. There is a place for DOT where you can sign up to get updates on their NOFOs. So we can make sure that Kevin has that. But Kevin, I know you've also been sending out updates. I don't know if you want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that is a good opportunity for a shameless plug that SCAG does have every other Monday now an email service called Money Mondays, and we're updating that regularly with a variety of funding applications and funding opportunities from both the state and the federal levels. And so that goes out to our email distribution list, and you can find that on our SCAG website. And of course, as soon as we get information from Holland and Knight or from our other partners or our other friends throughout the region, then we add those funding opportunities both to that website with an email that goes out again every other Monday. So that's one way that SCAG is trying to make sure that the entire region has access to those resources and knows about the opportunities as they become available. CalSTA also on its website has been keeping track of various funding opportunities as well. So if you were to do a Google search for CalSTA, California State Transportation Agency, and then the IIJA, you'd be able to find that website pretty easily there as well.
And then one last resource too, the White House set up one as well, bill.gov, BIL, that we can send to you too. It's a great place for all the fact sheets for all the infrastructure money, including DOT, but also EPA and other federal agencies. I can also share that with Kevin.
Great, very good. Thank you, Lori. All right, let's see that. So far, that means we're up to date with our questions in the chat. What else? What else do we have out there? I know there are more questions. Let me ask Leslie and Lori, let's say that we applied or, let's say that a jurisdiction applied for a grant in year A and was not successful. In year B, should the agency decide to submit an application for the same project again? Or what type of analysis should an agency take for itself in making that kind of a determination whether they should apply a second time?
I can take this one up. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Nope, jump in there, Lori. Sorry.
DOT does a great job, better than any other federal agency in providing debriefs. So if unfortunately you don't receive the grant, you're going to get an email saying you didn't receive the grant, but sign up here to receive a debrief. Then the career staff that oversee that program have the grant application in front of them and go, no, almost line by line. This is how you should wordsmith this. This is what you're lacking in benefit cost analysis. So that is a great tool. They also will give you your score. So it will be highly competitive. That means the application went to the secretary's desk. Competitive, acceptable, or not acceptable. So that also helps as well. If you know you're highly competitive and ranked high, of course, definitely you need to resubmit. Just we're tweaking your application. But I definitely encourage y'all to do a debrief if you've been unsuccessful.
Excellent. Thank you, Lori. Leslie, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think Lori nailed it.
Okay, cool. We have a question from Marilyn, and that is, are there any matching funds required for the various grants that were included in these two funding packages?
Yes, so it's a standard. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lori. No, sorry. Jump.
It's a standard US DOT federal share, 80 federal, 20 local. Although DOT does prefer a little bit higher local share, it's not a deal breaker like it was with the previous Trump administration. But with some of the programs like Emperor, Mega, and Chrissy, they are definitely looking for a higher cost share. But it's just a standard 80-20 for everything.
So 20 should be regarded as the minimum then?
Correct, Kevin. Although DOT is, there are a couple of examples where they actually have not required a match. So, for example, in this most recent Smart Planning Grant round that Lori mentioned, that was kind of how planning grants for bringing technology and innovation into transportation. They actually did not require a match for that, and said that applicants would not be scored more highly even if they did provide a match. But as Lori mentioned, kind of the standard has been the 80-20 split.
Very good, thank you. All right, and we are again caught up with our questions. Leslie and Lori, it seems to me there's been a lot of emphasis placed on regional collaboration, and I wondered if you could touch on that as well. And are you hearing anything from your meetings and your outreach with DOT or other decision makers on the emphasis they're placing on applications that come from a coalition of jurisdictions, for example, as opposed to just one?
Kevin, I do think that a regional approach is valued. Obviously, what matters most is a good, solid project. So that is first and foremost the consideration. But what you're seeing for a number of projects, I'm even thinking about the most recent infra that Lori mentioned over in San Diego that was awarded. That is that's a big regional project with a regional impact. And so I do think that that is something that DOT looks at and is very, very interested in. I'm also aware of DOT in some scenarios asking projects to consider merging. That was something that recently came up for another client that I work with, saying, there's some redundancies here, but if you all were willing to kind of combine your application, you would be very competitive, and actually gave them a shot at doing that.
Wow.
So I do think that, again, they're looking for high impact for the most number of people. And so I do think these regional collaborations should really be looked at. Even beyond regional collaboration, though, too, I think that there's a real benefit in having regional coordination and sort of folks being aware of each other's projects. And again, because this is a 5-year bill, I am aware of some regions where, folks are trying to sequence, like you go for rate, like these, we're going to support these 3 projects going for raise this time as a region. And then the next cycle will go in, the next round will go in with another 3 projects. So I am aware of regions doing that.
Very good. That's good feedback for us. We have another question on the equity grant program, and that's from Brian. And Brian's asking where we can find more information on the IRA generally, but also on the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program.
So there's been different summaries that we can send, Kevin, like that the White House has done, but candidly, there is not a lot of information right now. And so we're also eagerly awaiting the RFI for that, because I think, one of the things that's interesting when you look at those requests for information is it kind of gives you an idea of kind of where the agency's mind is on this and kind of what the mindset might be. But the White House has done some fact sheets. Of course, we have our tracker that we've done and also our summary as well, which we're happy to send around.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the RFI process while we're talking about that?
Yeah, so agencies will send out much like they do kind of with a no vote, they will issue a request for information. They have a series, it's usually published in the Federal Register. They will have a series of questions that they're trying to, get true feedback from, for how to structure a program, what kind of uses for the funds would be beneficial, what kind of covering a range of different topics. And entities can then write a response. You don't necessarily have to address every question that's answered in there, right? If you don't have an opinion on something, or you're really wanting to focus on 1 or 2 of the questions, that's fine. And then you submit them, and the agency is required actually to read all of the responses that they get. So for better or worse. And so, it's a really important part of the process. I think it's also helpful to, I've had folks share their responses to their members of Congress as well, because sometimes it's helpful for staff to hear kind of some feedback on the programs or how their constituents are hoping the programs will get structured. Lori, anything to add on that?
No, I think it's just this is a first time I think administration's done this. So it's just a great opportunity for y'all to propose how you want to see an actual new program to be created.
That's great. Thank you for that feedback and that information. It also sounds like a great opportunity, just like you were saying, to try and shape how a program is going to be created and the metrics by which successful applications will be judged. And so I'll just say that if any of the folks who are on the line decide to submit responses to those requests for information, that SCAG would love to be copied or to receive a copy of the letter that you submit, because we from time to time will also submit comments on the development of these grant applications. It would be great if we were able to support each other in that effort to bring these federal resources back to our region.
And if you're a member of some of these trade associations, like U.S. Conference of Mayors or National League of Cities, they also are submitting comments too. So that's another opportunity for you to share some of your ideas under what they're submitting.
Excellent. Thank you, Lori. We have a question from Marilyn, and that is, will the DOT or federal agencies be available for one-on-one meetings prior to submitting an application for a project?
Yes, and actually, Lori and I both think it is fantastic if you're able to get in with agency staff in advance of submitting the project, because our experience has been that DOT is willing to help, particularly when the NOFO is not open yet. They're able to be much more forthcoming about, a project, potential sources of funding. Sometimes they'll hear something and even think that, there's other additional sources that you might want to consider as well as they're listening to the project. So we strongly recommend going to meet with the agencies virtually or in person in advance of submitting a project to get some feedback.
And another opportunity, although it's not one-on-one, is that USDOT and EPA, and I think other agencies as well, are holding office hours on a bi-weekly basis. So we also can share that with Kevin if you would like to join that.
That's great. Thank you very much. All right. What other questions do we have out there? Leslie, what question were you expecting to hear from us today that you haven't heard so far?
Kevin, you have been very comprehensive. I feel like you've hit them all. I think, I guess, the one question that we've gotten a few times is obviously with the divided Congress, does this, what kind of impact is that going to have on the IIJA? And, the good news is that for much of the funding that we talked about in the bipartisan infrastructure law, that's, mandatory funding. It's already been appropriated. So those programs are going to keep on existing, and there's little at this point that Congress can do. We would expect, additional oversight. There may be additional hearings. How is the money being spent? Is it getting out fast enough? But in terms of hard dollars, can they take away the dollars? The answer is no. The one exception will be, around the programs that we mentioned that are going to require appropriated funding, like the Healthy Streets program. We'll see what happens around appropriations with the divided Congress. It may be more complicated to get a final bill through or to get additional funding for new programs, because I think we're about to be in deficit reduction mode. But I think the really good and exciting part is that money is here to stay for the next 5 years.
Excellent. I was wondering that too, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. Since we don't have any other questions, could I ask you what your thoughts are on earmarks for the next year? Let's say that a city or a jurisdiction has an interest in pursuing a project that doesn't fit into one of the various boxes here that would be included as a funding program from the IIJA or the IRA. What are your thoughts on earmarks going into next year, or to the next Congress rather?
Well, I think, and I'd love to hear Lori's perspective on this as well, but, I think you've got Senator Patty Murray from Washington State, who's going to be chairing the Senate Appropriations Committee. I should just say, a side note, we are very likely to be in a situation where all 4 members, majority ranking member on the Senate, majority ranking member in the House for appropriations, are all going to be women, which is very exciting, very historic. But so Senator Patty Murray has been a huge champion of earmarks, big believer in earmarks. And so she has pretty much said point blank, we will be doing earmarks in the Senate. given how closely divided the House is, there are many people that think that Republicans are going to want, they'll say here's the quiet part out loud, right? That you really need earmarks to kind of get stuff done and to get people willing to vote for appropriations bills. And so there's been a lot of, the Republican caucus has formally punted this discussion till after Thanksgiving, but there is a lot of speculation that they will essentially allow earmarks, and it will be done on a case-by-case basis. Each member will make a decision for themselves as to whether or not they want to do an earmark. Historically, Kevin, earmarks have been really, really helpful for projects. We're talking in that $1 to $2 million range. So this is not your, the earmarks of decades ago where you were pulling in $100 million for your project. So these are smaller projects that can be advanced with $1 to $2 million. Remembering that members want to have something to show when they invest in an earmark. They want something really tangible. So thinking about, could that be like last dollars in for something? And again, in that $1 to $2 million range. Lori, I feel like I just talked for a very long time, so please jump in.
The other thing I was going to jump in and say, when they, at the House Republican Conference last week, when they raised this, a moderate member named Congressman Tom Cole, who's a big earmarker, senior appropriator on the House side, put a pause and said, let's discuss this further. So I'm hoping he is going to lobby his colleagues to make sure that the Republicans vote for earmarks.
Excellent. Very good. So there are a lot of opportunities then to pursue funding for our needs out here. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions come through. Lori, maybe now's the chance I could put you on the spot. What was the question that you didn't hear today that you think that we should have asked?
Oh, goodness. You did put me on the spot. I was expecting the share, the federal local share. Oh, Kevin, I'm sorry. I cannot. That was the one I was thinking about. I apologize. I cannot think of another one.
Well, we got that question, so we're on it out here in the Skag region.
You are, exactly. Sure. You're always very prepared.
I see Francisco smiling. Francisco, do you have any questions for us today?
I have no questions. You asked my question.
All right. Well, I'm happy to sit in the silence for another minute or two while we continue to gather our thoughts, but then maybe after that, we might want to consider calling it a presentation. So we'll just say, if anyone has any other questions for the group, that please put those into the chat. As a last call. All right, well, I would like to thank and give a special thanks to Leslie and to Lori for sharing their expertise and their knowledge with us. And I would like to thank all of the many people from around the region who signed up and logged in to the presentation today. I'd also like to say that for SCAG member jurisdictions, that we are more than happy to provide letters of support for your applications for local projects and programs that are consistent with the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. So if you have a particular project or a program that is consistent with that document, then please do not be shy about asking SCAG for a support letter. We would be more than happy to evaluate that, to review consistency, and then to provide that letter to help you bring those federal and state resources back to the region to achieve our congestion, air quality, and pollution reduction goals. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you again, Leslie and Lori, and we'll look forward to connecting with you at another opportunity.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.